dare I say it, it is of poetic importance. But though these four poets may not necessarily be writing of love poetry in the classic sense of the absent lover, nevertheless, the question of how we relate to the world forms part of that question. Who are we in relationship to the other? What stance do we take in relation to the matters that move us? The question of language in all its manifestations, from the question of whether one uses the vernacular or a more arcane language, is of critical importance to the poet, no matter their particular sensibility. In this session today, the question of language is rendered immediately complex by a more fundamental question, the choice of English or Greek, or indeed their commingling, as much as a translation of one's poems into either language. At least two of the poets in this session, all of them Australian-born, or at least in the case of one brought up here, also write in Greek. That duality of language is perhaps a symptom of the heritage of migration, since, let's face it, Greek is an imported language, but so is English, since the latter is also, in its origins in Australia, a language from elsewhere. The choice of a particular language, let alone the different registers within a language, is also a symptom of the extraordinary pull any language can have on us. Its sounds, its verbal music, its rhythms. I remain forever enthralled at the sound of the opening lines of Dante's Divine Comedy, which in the medieval Italian is nel mezzo del cammin di nostra vita. Now those repeated consonants, that marvellous assonance that no translation can ever give. Yet our choice of language can have political as much as existential consequences. The language we write in, English or Greek, as well as the kind of language we write in. The work of these four poets crosses boundaries of language, since some like Panayiota, Pixie, Trangas and Dorothy Poulopoulos also write in both Greek and English. And I think Dorothy is going to be reading a poem in Greek today, among other things. Or boundaries of perception, since their imagination crosses domains, like Melpomene Selemidis, who writes of love in an Australian landscape, yet speaks of the absence that haunts her from far away, and boundaries of ethical living, like Konthilo con Armatas, who raises this question in a poem which I think she'll be doing today, like America. So without much further ado, I'd like to actually call on our first reader, who today will be Panayiota Pixie Trangas. Panayiota is of both Greek and Irish heritage, and she grew up in both Australia and Greece. She tells me that she's always remembered being a poet and has been a long-time member of several online poetry communities since 1998. And of course, as I've already said, she writes in both Greek and English. She's got a chapbook on sale today, Tender and Raw, Book of Poetry, which I hope you'll all rush out to purchase. She's also a painter and has an extensive background in the fashion and clothing creative industries. More recently, she's launched her new business, a health and wellbeing women's studio. And the reason I mentioned that is because it forms part of her general approach to her creativity. She views her work, including her poetry, as being about empowering women and allowing them to share their wisdom and experience. Panayiota?
Black sheets. Elegance oozes from her in the silky fabric she drapes herself in, with inspiring colours of beige feathers, bursts of white, through black with gold tinges. Her lover invites her into his alien bed. It warms her from the inside out, and she feels she can breathe again. And so she rests there, between black sheets in her lover's arms, where all T's are crossed and I's dotted. Within this pure space of pause for breath, she can feel again, her soul smile again. No, there's no care of consequence for her. All battles have already been fought, already been won and lost. And so she defies reason and ego, and she stays to sleep with him. He hasn't changed since the last time they were together. Still passive, still funny, still real with her, still sexy. Maybe it's the realness she craves, it's not clear. Maybe it's the feeling of being understood that we all crave from our lovers. Maybe they are both afraid to love others and so love each other instead. Who knows why anyone does anything anyway? All is always just speculation at best here. And so she lets herself relax deeply. Somehow the blackness of the sheets envelop her, as do his arms while she sleeps. So strange, so strange, so foreign and frightening, the reality of this closeness, this intimacy. But it feels good to her, and she feels precious here, and so she stays with him, unsure and suspended. Intertwined in this alien's bed with black sheets, with her alien's rhythmic breathing, she falls asleep deeply, both relishing the knowing of just being together, for now each other's, between black sheets in an alien bed. Have one more. History. We bear crosses way too heavy for our souls, and the pedestals built of Baltic pine cut splinters through our skin as we tumble down, twisting ankles and losing earrings as we fall. Men, our carpenters, confused, poor is his story. And children become a consequence, lost souls, holding nothing but hope in their young faces. And all that's left are days uncertain of safety. For the sake of honour, I will climb for your love. For the sake of my preservation, I will fight you. For the sake of my success, I will crush you. Egotism passing on its seed through us, his story. And the consequences grow into full beings, unconsciously knowing all, yet consciously ignorant. By choice, I deny thee. By choice, I refuse this. And left are shattered adult souls, totally unhinged. Minds that need addictions to see through unsmoked screens. Stale is the air. Stale is the water. Stale is the seed. There must be more to the inhumanity I see. Validation to the reality that we have all lived. For the sake of sanity, I sacrifice my body. For the sake of future, I sacrifice my mind. For the sake of love, I sacrifice my soul. Longing, passing on its secrets through us, his story. We bear crosses way too heavy for our souls, and the pedestals built of Baltic pine cut. Splinters through our skin as we tumble down, twisting ankles and losing earrings as we fall. And it's still his story.
Thank you, Panayiota. They were very powerful poems. So I hope that you all do purchase a copy of the chapbook. Here, show. This is a chapbook, and I think it's going to be a gem. Okay. Our next reader is Konthilo con Armatas. Now, Con grew up in Melbourne, in the western suburbs. She's been attending open mic poetry readings for the past 12 years, has contributed to several group poetry anthologies, has participated in Overload Poetry Festival, and co-convened Westward Poetry, which is a poetry event that happens in the western suburbs. What she loves about some of the poetry that she has written in the last few years is her, what she calls integration of music, mime, and the use of artifacts in the performance. And I want us to hold that word for a moment in our minds, in the performance, because Con will be performing her poetry today. And other times, she has sung some of the poem and read other parts of the same poem. Importantly, she sees the significance of the voice being heard as the most critical thing. Con, if you can come to the floor or to the microphone.
America, 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 America. Thank you. Australia, the Clarence River, parallel green flood plains, farm sheds scattering hearts, river people, cold chisel, and other poets and musicians unite. Open up, ladies, give a little gents. The Chinese more Australian than the drought. The Chinese more Australian than the drought. Drought. Water skier, refugee, $2 shop, sewerage farm, water in our cup. Thank you. I'll just do one more. This one's called Carolyn is Blind. Carolyn is blind, but she smells love as she sits in the rose garden she and her lover create. Caroline is blind, but she hears love as she and her lover listen and respond in conversation. Caroline is blind, but she touches love as she and her lover play.
Nous voilà, mon amour, arrivé au bord du ravin. Et je sais, mon amour, que tu n'y comprends plus rien, que tu songes au beau jour. Mais aujourd'hui, c'est la fin. Aujourd'hui, c'est ton tour. Il faut lâcher ma main, mon amour. Je t'abandonne au bord du ravin, mon amour, qu'il est loin le creux du matin. J'ai déjà, par amour, sauté au fond du ravin. Et je sais, mon amour, que ça n'y change rien. Tu veux sauter, mon amour, je vais prendre un autre chemin et chercher un détour. Il faut lâcher ma main, mon amour. Rendez-vous au fond du ravin, mon amour, qu'il est loin le premier matin.
I think we can see in Con's performance her background in open mic. And what I like about that is that it, problematizes our notion of poetry and what poetry is, particularly the body in poetry. So I want us to think a little bit about that. Maybe we'll have a bit of a chat about that afterwards. Our next reader is Melpomene Selemidis. Excuse me, I'll put on my glasses. Now, Melpomene was born in Greece, but she grew up in Australia. She has lived and worked, however, in Greece in the 1990s. She says it being named after the Greek muse of tragedy, she takes inspiration from the Greek myths, as well as the poetry of Sappho, Homer, and further afield, Neruda and Rumi. Her poetry has been published in the annual short story and poetry anthology Short and Twisted, 2011 by, is it Cellophane Press? Cellophane Press. And also she's featured in Inscribe magazine, where she's also been interviewed. Her poetry has been screened at Fed Square during the Overload Poetry Festival, both in 2011 and in 2010. She also writes a blog, so we've got a blogger amongst us, where she features her poetry, her short stories, and her reviews. And her website is www.melanie.selemidis.com. She's also got a chapbook. It's called Musings, and she'll be reading from that today. And she's working, she tells me, on a magic realism novel set in Melbourne and Santorini. So I hope to read that someday soon, Melanie, Melpomene.
Get back there soon so I can finish writing it. Mythos. Here once again, I'm in the land of mythos. I keep coming back for communion with Zeus, Athena, Poseidon and the others. I have traced Ariadne's footsteps through the maze of the Minotaur. I have drunk and danced with Dionysus in the dark. I have leaned on the portal of Apollo in Naxos. I have bathed in the tears of Persephone. I have crept along the crater of the volcano in Atlantis. I have sung with Sappho in the sea. I have cried a second river in Hades. I believe in the stories of our people. I believe we live them. I believe we are them. Thank you. Burnished brown, glowing golden leaves, burnt orange, pale yellow corn, and overflowing rivers, beautiful, bright, brilliant, deep, reddish brown hues colour the landscape and dot the mountains with daubs of colour. Harvesting has been done. Now the fields are tilled in preparation for the new season. Helios is setting in a riot of colour which warms my heart and sets it aglow. Mountains full of autumnal trees sparkle. The air is chilling steadily as we approach the village. Kelly, Florina, Greece. As we ascend the mountain, it's a beautiful, homely, peaceful feeling, one so hard to express. Smells of smoke remind me of burnt leaves, fires, roasted chestnuts and toasted marshmallows. I find autumn and the approaching winter such a pleasant prospect here. Another place, another time. It's an instinctual affinity with this land that I feel. As we pass through burnished brown fields, I feel I'm going home. The mountains and the earth, sweet, rocky earth, speak to my soul. I can hear my ancestors' voices. I feel strangely wise and ancient, yet somehow also like a naive newborn. At once an old woman and a newborn babe. I feel all ages, all nations, all at once. I feel at one with the land, at one with the universe. It is my land, these are my people. I am home. Remember Delphi. Remember when we were in Delphi, the very womb of the world, atop Mount Parnassus, close to the clouds, embraced by bay trees. Dolphins carried Cretans there to build you a temple of cool Corinthian and Doric columns that reached up to the heavens. Remember how we chased each other through the woods till we collapsed into each other, breathless. Remember the snake you slew, the pit that became the Pythia's seat. Remember the riddle, the one whose answer we both already knew. One more, inspired by Neruda. Here I love you. Between the bush breeze and ocean spray, the trees whisper your name and the sun sets in shame every day. Here I love you, oceans and seas away, across continents, my love floats on tides and returns every day. Here I love you, amongst the oily eucalypts and discarded stringy bark. The birds' cries of longing echo the ache in my heart. Here I love you, where honeysuckle blossom, roused by the moonglow, seduces my sensibilities and lets my tears flow. Here I love you, as sunrise greets me with a wicked smile to remind me that I must go on living without you. Thank you.
Thank you, Melpomene. I certainly find Delphi myself a very inspiring place. Our fourth reader is Dorothy Poulopoulos. Dorothy was also born in Melbourne, but she lived extensively in Greece from 1994 to 2002, which she says she lived and worked there. And she says that accentuated her senses, and she felt compelled to express herself through poems as they provided for her the perfect medium for giving shape to intense emotions in condensed and crystallized form. So I think she must have responded very passionately to Greece. She's been publishing her poems since 1995 in Greek literary magazines in Australia and in Greece, and she's presented at various venues in Melbourne in both languages, including Federation Square as part of the World Poetry Reading Series. Now, she does write both in Greek and in English, and she has won awards for her poems, Thlipsi or Sorrow in 2002, and Philia or Friendship in 2003, from the Greek Australian Cultural League. Her work's also been anthologised in Greece, and she's had an extensive career in writing. She also wrote an arts column for a Greek community newspaper, and she's also written grammar books in Greece, so that's quite an extensive involvement with language. I think Dorothy's going to actually do a poem in Greek for us today as well, too, which I'm looking forward to. Okay, Dorothy?
Thank you, Tina. Καλημέρα. Θέλω και εγώ να σας καλωσορίσω στη παρέα μας σήμερα. Good morning and thank you for joining us. The Greek people are going to the polls again tomorrow for another round of elections. So I thought it appropriate to read a poem about what Greece means to me. This poem is called Santorini. To me, Santorini is like an X-ray of Greece. It isolates all of its vital organs, and because they occur in a minimalist landscape, they are accentuated. For instance, there are the bones of the earth, evidence of self-destruction, the sun and the sea, truth and intensity. I'll read this poem in Greek first. Here it goes. Okay. Η Σαντορίνη. Και μετά από όλα όσα συνέβησαν, έρχεται η Σαντορίνη ως θύμηση ότι ίσως μπορεί να υπάρξει ζωή μέσα από τα συντρίμμια. Γιατί Σαντορίνη ανίκητη μάχεσαι, τον θάνατο, το ψέμα, τη φοβία, ζωή από τις τάχτες σου, βράχο στα λαβωμένα χέρια σου, να ακουμπά και να χτίζει η νέα γενιά, να αγκαλιάζεις και να μνημονεύεις τα αρχαία σου παιδιά. Δίκαιη μητέρα, δέχεσαι και αγαπάς όλους τους ανθρώπους το ίδιο. Αληθινή με σένα, αληθινή με εκείνους. Καμία ανθρώπινη επέμβαση δεν σε μετάλλαξε, αφού ουσία και οπτική γωνία άλλαξες μόνο όταν σύστηκες εσύ, κυρίαρχη του εαυτού σου. Αληθινή μέχρι το κόκαλο, φοράς τα γυμνά οστά σου, κορώνα στο προσκεφάλι σου. για να συναντήσεις τη βαθιά πληγή του κάθε ανθρώπου που τολμά να σε κοιτάξει στα μάτια, γιατί η συμπόνια πάντα ενώνει και πόσο μάλλον εσύ που από την αρχή υπόσχεσαι να γλύφεις τις πληγές με το άφθονο γαλάζιο αίμα σου και το μεγαλειότατο ηλιοβασίλεμά σου που υπόσχεται το ανεκπλήρωτο αύριο. Το μέλλον μπροστά στο οποίο συνήθως πολλοί τρομάζουν, εσύ προσμένεις με αισιοδοξία, μέσα σε άπλετο φως, παρόλο που γνωρίζεις καλά ότι γαλουχείς τη φωτιά που θα σε κάψει. Δεν πτωείσαι, γιατί είναι η δική σου φλόγα. Κυοφορείς, υποσχόμενη ζωή μετά θάνατο. My English version of this poem is a work in progress, not quite ready yet, but I would still like to share it with you if I may. Santorini. And after everything that came to be, Santorini stands as a reminder that truly there may still be life among the debris, because Santorini, undefeated you stand in the face of death, lies and fear. Life from your ashes rises anew, your charred molten arms a cradle for your young children to build, as you remember and embrace your ancient megalithic children too. A just mother, you accept and love all people equally, true to yourself, true to them. No human intervention ever truly altered you, since substance and perspective you changed only when you were ready to. Self-governed, O thou Santorini, true to the bone, you throw open the coverings of your earth and bear the naked crust as a crown, proud of all that you have withstood, to meet the deep wounds of all people who dare to look deep into your eyes and share. For compassion of blood and bone always connect, especially with you, when from the beginning you promised to wash and heal the wounds with your abundant sea blue and your majestic sunset, which promises the fruition of unfulfilled dreams tomorrow. The future before which many stand in fear, you invite with open arms in your abundant light, even though you know full well that you are nourishing the fire within you, the fire that will burn you. You stand reassured because it is your flame you are carrying, promising new life after death. Okay. I have another poem I would like to read in Greek. It's called Αγγλική και Ελληνική. This last poem that I will read is called Αγγλική και Ελληνική, and it is about the duality of ethnicity. It speaks of a time when I felt that I was like two people in one body. Αγγλική και Ελληνική. Πολύ μιλήσαμε για μεταπολεμικούς μετανάστες, του 40, του 50, του 60 και πιο πριν, για αυτούς που γύρισαν μετά από χρόνια και παραπονέθηκαν, όπως λέει και ο Σεφέρης, ότι τα δέντρα μου έρχονται ως τη μέση και οι λόφοι μοιάζουν με πεζούλια και όμως, σαν ήμουνα παιδί, έπαιζα πάνω στο χορτάρι, κάτω από τους μεγάλους ίσκιους. Αλλά πάνε τόσα χρόνια από τότε. Αλήθεια, τα παιδιά τους τι κάνουν? Είναι καλά? Η Έλλη, ο Κώστας, ο Γιαννάκης, η Αγγελική. Μόνο για μία κοπέλα γνωρίζω από πρώτο χέρι για να σας ιστορίσω. Μια φορά και έναν καιρό γεννήθηκε μια κοπέλα στην Αυστραλία. Από Έλληνες γονείς. Έμαθε άπτεστα την Αγγλική, ελάχιστα την Ελληνική. Δύσκολη περίπτωση συλλογιζόταν. Απ' τη μία η Αγγελική, φιλική θα έλεγα, και απ' την άλλη η Ελληνική, σχεδόν άγνωστη. Τι δίδυμο κι αυτό. Η Ελληνική την ακολουθούσε παντού, έστεκε σιωπηλά και την κοιτούσε, αλλά δεν αποκάλυπτε το πρόσωπό της. Ποια είναι αυτή, απορούσε η Αγγλική, δεν γνώριζε. Η Ελληνική όμως συνέχιζε να την παρακολουθεί, χωρίς να ομιλεί. Η Αγγλική από τη μεριά της, με όλη την ευγένεια που την διέκρινε, συνέχιζε να την συστήνει. Και από εδώ η Ελληνική. Είμαστε μαζί από την αρχή. Έτρεμε όμως η Αγγλική μόλις την συνέστηνε. Μήπως της έκαναν μετά 2 ή 3 ερωτήσεις παραπάνω για την ελληνική και δεν γνώριζε τι να απαντήσει. Τι ντροπή, θα λέγανε από μέσα τους. Δεν ξέρεις. Μα τόσο καιρό, και αν της μιλούσαν και ελληνικά, λίγο το έχεις. Κάποια στιγμή η ελληνική άρχισε να της προκαλεί έναν φοβερό εκνευρισμό, αφού δεν της μιλούσε ποτέ, παρά μόνο στεκόταν σαν αυστηρός κριτής και την κατασκόπευε. Ναι, την κατασκόπευε. Έτσι ένιωθε. Η Αγγλική μοιραζόταν τα πάντα μαζί της, ενώ η ελληνική δεν της έλεγε τίποτα. Μούγκα. Τι κολλητή κι αυτή να σου τύχει, ούτε την έβγαλε ποτέ από καμιά δύσκολη θέση. Εδώ που τα λέμε, μάλλον αυτή την έβαζε σε δυσκολία, σε αμηχανία, σε αδιέξοδα. Για να μην στα πολυλογώ, της προκαλούσε πρόβλημα της κοπέλας. Η Αγγλική δεν άντεξε, κάτι έπρεπε να κάνει. Μια μέρα είπε, πρέπει να βάλω ένα τέλος σε αυτή τη σχέση, σε αυτό το μαρτύριο που με δέρνει. Πρέπει με κάποιον τρόπο να ξεκολλήσω, δεν πάει άλλο. Και έτσι έφτασε η στιγμή της μεγάλης απόφασης. Ήξερε ότι ή έπρεπε να αγνοήσει την ελληνική και να αρνηθεί οποιαδήποτε ανάμειξη μαζί της, με απαντήσεις του τύπου «δεν την είδα, δεν την ξέρω» και ούτω καθεξής, ή να κάνει ένα ταξίδι στην πατρίδα που τη γέννησε για να μάθει από πρώτο χέρι ποια είναι αυτή η τελική, ποια είναι αυτή η ελληνική τέλος πάντων, από πού ήρθε και τι γυρεύει. Να ξεκαθαρίσει μία και καλή. Και έτσι σηκώθηκε μια μέρα αυτή η κοπέλα, μάζεψε τα μπογαλάκια της και αγόρασε 2 ειστήρια. Ναι, 2. Τι να έκανε. Δεν την αποχωριζόταν η ελληνική και ζήσαμε εμείς καλά και αυτή, καλύτερα. Thank you for listening. Σας ευχαριστώ πολύ.
I'll take my seat over there next to our 4 poets today, but let's give them another clap because they've all done a wonderful job. I'm just wondering, when I get myself together here, if I could just open up the discussion with actually the really fundamental question, which is the language in which we all write. Pixie and Dorothy, you both do write in Greek.
Yes.
I think Melpomene writes only in English. Con, you only write in English, and I only write in English. So what's governing the choice of language for us?
For me, Greek is my emotional language, so poetry comes to me in Greek. English is my rational language, and prose is more easily written by me in English. This doesn't surprise me though, because I grew up in a Greek family, and when I was a child, my parents didn't speak any English, so the first stirrings of emotion that I felt were expressed in Greek within a Greek context. So it doesn't surprise me.
Certainly listening, for me, I don't know for the audience, but for me, listening to the Greek and the English, and the thought that was going through my mind was how incredibly melodious and sweet the Greek sounds. Whereas I find the English, those Germanic sounds coming through, much harsher. Con, you have the voice is very important to you. Yeah. How do you respond to that?
It was interesting that you identified the Greek language as the emotional language, and I can relate to that because if I hear Greek music or something set in Greek, or I see something in a Greek context, it can really move me emotionally, to tears or to laughter. I may not have the words or the language skills, but it moves me in a physical sense, in an emotional sense, a psychological sense. So that's really interesting, even though I would say English is probably my first language, even though I can converse in Greek, but not so fluently. So that's really interesting.
It kind of leads to an interesting question, doesn't it, though? Particularly for those of us who have both parents Greek, yeah? Because, Pixie, your mum's got Irish heritage, yeah? So, you know, the language you hear from your parents as you're growing up has been Greek. So that emotional connection is certainly in the Greek language. I suspect for most of my friends who are of Anglo-Irish backgrounds, the emotional and rational language happens to be English. So this duality, this complexity, this sort of border crossing, how do we handle this?
Well, for me, it was I grew up completely bilingual, so cultures as well as language. So I never kind of identified specifically which poem or what type of poem would come out in Greek or in English. It's just something that happened. You know, looking back, I can find patterns if I look hard enough in the subject matter, etc. But it's not something that I pay attention to because I've kind of accepted it. I kind of grew up, you know, being born in it. You don't have a choice but to accept it. So it's not something that is clear. There are boundaries and clear lines and definitions and things like that. It's a fluid transition that you kind of are born with.
Yep.
Yeah.
And that fluidity is really actually quite interesting because it enables you to sort of come in and out of different languages, doesn't it?
That's right.
Yeah.
And it plays a very big impact on your life, your social life, your family life, your connections with people, everything.
With Con, I was really quite interested in your performance because, you know, you talk about the voice being the most significant thing. What do you mean by that?
I think I mean that it really is a justice issue. And I think from a female that grew up in a quite rigid Greek traditional family, it's even more important that I found the voice, because often, you know, women are expected to not have much of a voice or a say, that, I found anyway. So having discovered the open mic was like a release for me. It was, I mean, I was writing, but I didn't really have an audience and didn't have the connection with other writers, had the same passion. So the open mic was incredibly powerful for me because it brought me out of myself. It allowed me to have the confidence, you know, finally and progressively to share my ideas and to be able to listen to other writers. Was just wonderful. And anyone can get up. You know, it doesn't cost you anything. It's accessible. So that was very empowering for me as a person.
And again, what I noticed is that, you know, that fluidity of your work, the more lyrical poem, the more performative poem like America, which is interesting actually because as you're performing that poem, what's going through my mind is my various responses to the performance, and they're coming from me. It's my own reactions, my own vision of what I think America might or might not mean. And for a lot of people in the room, America is an interesting double-edged sword because a lot of our parents perhaps wanted to migrate to America and ended up in Australia. So it's actually quite interesting. I found it quite interesting the way that, you know, there's a sense of longing, which is nothing wrong with that. Because certainly Sappho has a sense of longing in her poetry for the beloved. But especially you, Melpomene, you're really crossing time and space and they're coming together in the one poem. And what's going on there for you?
For me, it's always been this longing for the homeland, longing for a spiritual home. Even though I grew up here, I've never felt obviously comfortable here, and I spend a lot of time trying to fit in and be Aussie, and that's why my language is English, because I just felt that I would be accepted, even though I spoke Greek at home, and that's my emotional, that visceral language that I respond to. I've always, intellectualised it and used formal English in expressing myself, but the longing is one of the themes in all my work, and it's about going back home, and it's that feeling that I had as I was going back to my village and feeling that I was a part of that place in a way that the Greek myths connect me to my cultural heritage in the same way that the Aboriginal people here connect to their myths. I can appreciate their myths and I understand their connection to the land, and that's how I feel about Greece. So it's always that I've gone back and forth, and I think I will go back and forth for the rest of my life. And it's just, this is my home now, but there's that spiritual home that I'm always longing for.
It's very interesting because as you were all reading the poems and I was thinking about what the poetry was saying and even our conversation, what strikes me is just, tradition. There's been an enormous amount of poets who've actually had an emotional language that's other than the one in which they write. So is there a sense of freedom, perhaps, that comes with writing in the language that all your taboos exist in? In not writing in the language in which your taboos exist. Does it free you up? Does it open you up to, to all sorts of things? Or does it emotionally close you down? For you, it's your emotional language. So when you write in your rational language, what's happening there?
I'm not emotionally loaded.
Right.
I think the English culture, the Australian culture, the Anglo culture helps me to put a more rational order to things and even analyse things. I think when I write in Greek, I'm not really analysing so much. I'll analyse it later and I'll analyse it in English.
Yep.
So that it'll...
it's eventually you say that because I often think of myself the rational language of English, and I love those sounds of English. But I think I'll open up to the audience and ask for some questions, if the audience has any questions. Any questions? Yeah, of course.
You spoke about the relating to the Aboriginals and them, it's in the same way that you relate to the Greek myths. Given that you spent writing English and the language that gives you the barriers, the framework within which to express yourself, have you thought about exploring the relationship that the Australian part of you might have with the Aboriginal or the Indigenous component that you live with also?
I'm a teacher, so I teach lots of different myths to my students, and I do connect with them, but not in the same way. It's not my story. They're not my stories, and I can't really relate to them in the same way. But I do teach them, I do appreciate them, but I just can't connect with them.
And it's all that question of appropriation too, isn't there?
Yeah.
And who tells the story? Yeah.
I think another important point in that is just the sense of belonging that could be missing from other cultures, histories and myths as well. Because being bilingual and growing up with several cultures, you kind of tend to have a sense of belonging in a few places, so it's not isolated in just the one. It's not sort of limited in that way.
Not as intense, you mean?
No, not limited. It's a lot more broader. For example, I have a sense of belonging to the Irish culture and I have a sense of belonging to the Greek culture. So for someone who did have Aboriginal upbringing as well as Greek upbringing, I'm sure that they'd feel that way as well. It depends on the individual, I suppose.
Do you write about your Irish heritage?
Yes, I have a few pieces that mention it, but I find that my culture and my heritage comes through my work in different ways, in references, and a lot of the times what influences some of my work in something that I'll hear or someone I've met, or it comes through subtly in some poems. It's not that sort of in-your-face kind of recognition of direct culture that sort of shows up all the time. Yeah,
it's interesting when you say language and try to define that, because I was thinking about these poems that I selected today, and I was thinking that symbolism and metaphor is really important in the way I express, and I'm just thinking how we define language in relation to the use of symbols and metaphors, like the language of symbols, the language of metaphor, and somehow that transcends, the language that we're speaking, or the tongue, in a sense. It's a different kind of language again. And maybe the language of, the senses and of ideas, hope and the dream that we have, the dreams we chase. But I was thinking, the senses are so important, and that comes through in the poem about Caroline is Blind. And even with the America poem, it's really asking people to respond with all of their senses to that symbol, what it symbolises to them.
Can I say something about the American poems? I don't want to monopolise, but
Yep.
I found that the intonation that you used told 16,000 stories.
Yeah, it's
my
interesting.
experience, the longing, the getting, the disappointment, everything. I got all of that just in the different intonations. It was fantastic.
Thank you.
Which brings across, I think, Con's point about the voice.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I find that very interesting what you said, Con, because I was wondering this week, as I was preparing for today's session, whether I would write poetry at all if I didn't have the Greek language, because it's the Greek language that has moved me to write in poetry, and my poetry comes to me in Greek. And watching you up on stage today, I thought, yes, of course, because it goes beyond language.
Yeah. And yet it's interesting because, my child does not speak Greek, but the fact that he's here today listening to the Greek poetry, poetry in Greek, I think is fantastic. It's a fantastic opportunity to have that language heard and reheard and valued. So I think that's brilliant.
Dina.
My question is for Pixie Trangas concerning her first poem, History. Now, that poem can be a meditation of history and a female perspective or a female take on history. The title of the poem ties really well with the ending of the poem. You split up the word in two to make his story. Would you like to expand on that, please?
Well, it was purposely done for the poem, and I do tend to think that from a lot of women that I've spoken to, and the general consensus among women is that most of the history that we learn of and that we associate ourselves with is from the male perspective. So there are countless, infinite amount of female stories that haven't been heard, which should be included in history. And, whether that's just a mum at home, or whether it's a woman who's, accomplished several things in her life, or, a tribal woman who's an elder, or whatever the woman's position is in her life, those stories need to be heard. And it's unfortunate that throughout history they haven't been. So because it's also part of my work and the women that I've met, it's important for me to be able to emphasise that women do have stories. They are just important as men's, and whether they want to be called women's stories or part of history or whatever, it's relevant. It's half of who we are, actually.
Yes, Kyriakos.
It is good that this festival brings to the knowledge of the rest of the community some of its members who write poetry, in this instance, in English. May I point out that in Melbourne there are two literary magazines, Antipodes and Poulopoulos, published by the Greek Cultural League in one instance, and the other by the Greek
Writers Association.
Australia. Those magazines invite contributions that bilingual, and I bring to the knowledge of the rest of the community through work of a second generation. And I would urge new members to explore that possibility to come in contact with the rest of the Greek community. And this is a good opportunity to draw into those publications, which are annual, consider, and this is the time to submit your work for the...
Oh, don't tell poets that.
If you want addresses, so we can...
Yes. Actually, you make a very important point, because something that we possibly, I don't know, they'll probably be addressed in private discussions, no doubt, but the whole question of, you know, poets of Greek heritage writing in English, and it raises a whole other tradition of Greek diasporic poetry, not only here, but in Canada, in America, South Africa. So it's a very interesting sort of a thing to think about. We had a question here.
First of all, I'd like to congratulate all the girls, and I'm really touched with all of you. But at the same time, I've got a question. If your childhood experiences did play a role in your writing, and if it did, in a way, did it play a role also with your type of character as well? Can you explain, or if anyone can explain that?
Who'd like to answer that?
Our childhood, I believe, always impacts on us, and I don't know exactly how it would impact on different people, but I believe, generally speaking, that if your home environment is one that is attractive to you as a child, then you would probably happily embrace that culture and language. But if your home environment is one that you don't identify with and one that causes discomfort to you, then I think in that case you would probably try and move away from it or deny it, at least for a time. It's like a rebellion, yeah.
I definitely think that your childhood has an impact on your character and the work that we produce as adults, no matter what you do, actually. Poetry is just one of those things. And yeah, I think that there's positives and negatives, and it's about how you grow, how you learn, how you use the information you grow up with, just like anything, really. But it definitely has an impact. Yeah.
I think we'll have to end it there, but, you know, we have... Dina, sorry.
Look, when we were devising this session for this morning, the four girls who spoke to you so beautifully, who read their poetry so beautifully, said to me, one of them definitely said to me in a phone conversation that, look, it's okay, Dina, we'll take it as a practice. We're sure there'll be no one in the hall at 10 o'clock in the morning on a Saturday. So you have no idea how much I respect every single person in this room today. Thank you to all of you so much for coming. It means so much to these wonderful girls. I'd like to say also a word. Tina Giannoukos came here and so ably said so many beautiful words, really introduced, her introduction to this panel was a work of art, in my opinion. It was really beautiful. Tina has just completed her doctorate in creative writing. You can hardly tell, can you? And she is also a very, very fine poet in her own right, as I well know, and she'll be reading her own poetry tomorrow at 5 o'clock in the Generation Next session. But for the moment, let's focus on these four excellent poets who so bravely started this festival for us this morning. And can we please give them a really warm round of applause?
I can see my son, 5-year-old.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Tina. Thank you, Tina.
Thank you.
I took it for granted. Right now we're starting with a second session, which is a fantastic session, so please don't move from your seats. And thank you, Helen, for reminding me. Thank you.